All right, welcome in, everybody, to Sports Daily. Jacob Albracht here. Malcolm Carter alongside us. More on that in just a second. We'll get into what Malcolm's going to be doing with us here for the next little bit. Excited about that. We've got the Chiefs' next matchup. The divisional round is set across the NFL as we wrap up Wild Card Weekend last night. We'll get into all things football today as we look ahead. The Chiefs, listen, I've been telling you, I kind of like their chances here. We'll get into it. We'll also look ahead to K-State men's basketball, a big one tonight in Manhattan against Baylor. All kinds of good stuff coming for you. Executive producer of the Chiefs Radio Network, Dan Israel, coming in the second hour. Jad Chambers producing for us, man in that KFH hotline, which, as always, is at 869-1240. We're going to give away some HTO. Some iced tea, some coffee. We're beginning to thaw out of this deep freeze. We'll get up to a sweltering 20 degrees here today. The sun will come out. It'll be fantastic. And then we'll creep back into normalcy a little bit. I hope everybody's staying safe, staying warm out there. Malcolm, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. I can't complain. I think most Michigan fans will say that on this Tuesday.
That's right. You got a national championship. You got the Lions winning their first playoff game. Is that of your lifetime, Malcolm?
That is of my lifetime.
That's of Malcolm's lifetime. If you go into the office, Malcolm has his Matt Stafford Lions jersey sitting there in the office, which is an interesting dynamic to that game. But yeah, so what Malcolm's going to do here, Malcolm, of course, runs promotions here at Odyssey for all our family of networks. He's going to step in. So with Tommy's new position, he's got to be in a couple of meetings on Tuesday mornings. So what we're going to do is we're going to have Malcolm swing in here, start the first hour with me, and then he'll just finish the show with us. Malcolm Carter Tuesdays, if you want to call it that. So we're looking forward to that. Tommy and Malcolm will have hour number 2 today. It's kind of a wacky week for us, but on normal circumstances, we'll just have basically Malcolm in on Tuesdays, and we're looking forward to that. Different flavor, different variety to the show a little bit, mix things up. And we'll have some fun with it. So let's jump right into it, Malcolm. Football last night. We have, well, the Bills-Steelers actually got a little interesting. It didn't end particularly interesting. The Bills still covered the number. They won by 2 touchdowns. The Buccaneers-Eagles was kind of a blowout. It was sort of a weekend of big margins a little bit. Outside of your Rams-Lions game, everything finished in at least double digits. In some of them, big-time double digits. But the trend sort of continued last night with those 2 games. And now we move on to the round where typically things do get far more interesting. This is usually a fun weekend, and I think it'll be the case again this weekend. These are teams, outside of the Texans and the Packers that everybody sort of expected to be here probably. But here we go. What'd you think of the games last night?
I think the games last night went relatively how I expected them to go. I think some folks were shocked by the Eagles, but I think that the last several weeks of the regular season showed that they're just not the Eagles team that we were accustomed to last year. So, I mean, I expected them to come out there and compete a little more, but I mean, between their tackling and their secondary, I mean, the game pretty much went how I'm sure the Buccaneers expected it to go. They were going to throw it around everywhere. I think Mayfield had at least like 35 passing attempts. So, I mean, hey, it's the playoffs, man. It's win or go home. I think the Buccaneers just wanted it more.
Yeah, I can't remember a position group like such a specified position group having this big of an impact on an entire team. And that's coming from somebody who watched the Chiefs wide receivers for a lot of the year. But man, the Chiefs secondary, I mean, the Eagles secondary, it just like it prevents them. It's like it just like bleeds into everything. And it's been so bad all year, which is crazy because when we looked at the draft with the Eagles, of course, coming off of the Super Bowl appearance and all of these things, you're like, all right, they're in a position to be amazing. And then they sort of started the year that way. And then that secondary, which was thin, like that was their deficiency even coming into the year, just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And now what did they start? 10-1. Now you've got a team that started 10-1 after a Super Bowl appearance. And people are having a conversation about should that young rising star head coach be fired? and it has been wild. And
Yeah, it
I don't
has.
think he'll get. I don't think he'll get fired. By the way,
He should not
nor
get
do I think.
fired. Not at
Nor
all.
do I think he should. Like something got away from. Now, if they come out and struggle next year, then I think you can have the conversation for sure. But like to go from 10-1 to the way that season ended, largely without like your key players hurt. And their secondary was decimated and bad to begin with. And they didn't have AJ Brown in this game, but I hate to break it to everybody. AJ Brown wasn't going to make up the difference in 23 points last night. So it's one of the stranger falls I've seen within a season. And I can't think of anything other than their secondary was just so bad. But man, that can't be it. Jason Kelsey now apparently will retire. He reportedly told teammates last night. That thing unraveled in Philadelphia. And good for Baker Mayfield in Tampa, right? Like Baker Mayfield's been kicked around a little bit. He got a screw job in Cleveland. He played hurt, cost him his job, bounces around a little bit, had a nice little resurgence in LA last year, goes to Tampa and takes the Buccaneers into the second round of the playoffs. And, he's playing hurt again, looked pretty good last night. And the Bucs, as we look ahead to the Bucs, I'm not going to, and I know it's your Lions, but I'm not going to say the Bucs can't go win another playoff game. Like they've kind of got something going on offense, and we'll see. But it's good for Baker Mayfield, a good story. But I think the story is the Eagles. I don't think the story is the Bucs today. I think the story is the Eagles.
Yeah, for sure. And I think something that they mentioned last night, Jalen Hurts just doesn't look like the Jalen Hurts that we're used to. I know that they said that he was back from his injury, but he looks a step slower. And I think that does kind of play into the flow of their offense. He's not getting those rushing attempts. Those RPOs aren't really as unpredictable as they've been in the past. So I do think they'll come back next year a better team. I think this will make them stronger. But like I said, I think they lacked. I don't think they wanted to come out there and really play their best last night. It kind of just like, well, we're here, so we're going to play.
Yeah, it's strange, and it's strange too because that's like think back to last year with what we saw in Sirianni and like the identity of this team. And tell yourself what happened, and you never believed it, right? You'd never believed that would have been the case, but it was. And, the Eagles and the Cowboys, man, like it just both just like, bleh, just can't falling through. But the other game, the Bills and the Steelers, is, of course, the one that we have far more interest in. Maybe not Malcolm because he wanted to see who his Lions would play. But,
yeah,
for Chiefs Kingdom, Tommy and I talked about this briefly at the end of the show yesterday, and I thought I thought I would sound crazy for saying it, but I honestly and genuinely thought it would be better for the Chiefs that the Bills win that game. Not because Pittsburgh's some dangerous team, but because of two things. One, I don't think I would want to see Houston now. I'd rather see what I'm familiar with in Buffalo. I'm not convinced Buffalo's that much better than Houston. I mean, they're better, but not that much better. And the other thing is, it gives Houston a chance to go take a swing at Baltimore. Pittsburgh wasn't going and beating Baltimore, but Houston might. I mean, I'm not going to count Houston out of that game next week. So I think for the Chiefs' sake, getting that outcome, big pick, because the Chiefs is the 3 seed. They're going to have to travel, right? And I've contended for months and months, even through the struggles, that if they do what they do well, that travels anyway, and it probably doesn't matter as much as it would in past years. So if they're going to have to do that, it doesn't really matter that they have to go to Buffalo. Go to Buffalo and get the win and hope that Houston can knock off Baltimore. I'd rather take my chances there than welcome in red-hot Houston and their sort of explosive offense, because Buffalo's not really an explosive offense. I'd rather have Buffalo and Houston take a swing at Baltimore, because Baltimore, who's ultimately has to worry you if you're Kansas City. It's not Buffalo. You can beat Buffalo. You had Buffalo beat in a game. You've beaten Buffalo in the postseason plenty of times. And what you do, I think, kind of translates well against Buffalo. So I don't think you worry about Buffalo. You worry about Baltimore. And if you can have Houston go take a swing at them, I think that's best case scenario, big picture, better for the Chiefs. Is it better this week? I don't know, but it's better for their chances to win a Super Bowl, I think.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but I do think playing that familiar foe will bode well for the Chiefs. I mean, they've had this team. It feels like they match up like twice a year at this point,
Yeah.
whenever they play each other. So that's actually a very interesting perspective on that. But I'll be interested honestly to see that Chiefs and Bills game. I mean, I really am leaning towards the Bills at this present moment in time. I think that their offense has found that sort of groove that they've been looking for. I think James Cook is RB1 of the future. So I think it'll be a different matchup for the Chiefs than what they're accustomed to seeing in the playoffs, like Josh Allen throwing it 40 times a game. So I really think that these two teams, even though they're familiar, they're coming in with looking and they have a different look to them than previous games.
So the Chiefs beat the Bills in 21 in the playoffs, and they beat them 38-20. Sorry, the Chiefs win that game. So basically, what the Bills have done is won all the regular season games, while the Chiefs have won all the postseason games.
Pretty much.
Right? That's sort of what we've seen a little bit. So in 21, you had the Chiefs lose the regular season game but win the postseason game. In 22, same thing. You had the Bills win the regular season game and the Chiefs win the postseason game in overtime. And then this year so far, the Bills win the regular season game, and here they are meeting in the postseason. That's been the recent history.
Now, will this be the first home game that the Bills have in the playoffs?
Correct. Okay. Of all 6 of those, of all 5, so out of the last 6, including this one, so this will be number 6 of that recent history. The Chiefs have hosted every one of those games. This will be the first time since 2020 that the Chiefs have gone to Buffalo. The Chiefs won that game. But, you go back 3-4 years in the NFL and you've gone back too far.
Yeah.
So, we look at that now, and it's just something that you're not afraid of if you're I think that's the biggest thing. You're just not afraid of that. It's not something that you fear to have to go to Buffalo. Now, they haven't gone there, but again, if the Chiefs are going to do what they need to do, which is play good defense, run the ball, and try to play mistake-free, if nothing else, on offense, that's not stuff you need home field for. If you're going to be explosive on offense, if you need if you need to wreck the other opposing offense's ability to do what it needs to do, those are the things you need home field for. I just think that the Chiefs are equipped to do whatever they want to do at any place. They just have to execute. It's all about execution for Kansas City. And so Buffalo comes in, they'll be 2.5-point favorites. That's essentially a home field favorite. It's basically a pick'em game with home field implying the 3 points or so for Buffalo. I would suspect that line actually moves toward Kansas City by the time we get to the game time. Buffalo's been an interesting team. Buffalo had a huge lead yesterday, gave up a lot of that lead, and then flexed back down on Pittsburgh. But when we look back at, the outcomes going all the way back to starting with that Kansas City game, which came after their bye, we know how that game ended up. Then they looked really good against Dallas. Then it was a 2-point win against the Chargers and a 6-point win against the Patriots. And you're like, okay. And then a 7-point win against the Dolphins, in which I think that spoke to, well, it really did speak to how bad Miami probably really was with all the injuries, but it also spoke to Buffalo's. But Buffalo wins despite making mistakes. If they make mistakes like that against Kansas City, they'll lose.
Right.
Kansas City will beat them. It almost, the old cliche, I think of, which team turns it over fewer times, or that's going to play out here. I think. I do think, if the Chiefs simplify it and just say, guys, if we eliminate those killer penalties and if we don't turn the ball over, we're going to win this game. And I do think that that's the case. I think that's true. I think that it matches up well for Kansas City. The over-under's at 46. That feels pretty high. For as explosive as Buffalo has been, it's all about that Chiefs defense.
Yeah, I agree. But like I said earlier, I do think with the Bills, I think that their focus going into the playoffs, and I think a little bit of yesterday, was keeping the ball on the ground, using Josh Allen's legs, and we're passing in rhythm with our successful running game. So I do think that the Chiefs will have some struggles there with the mobile quarterback like that, and then I really think James Cook is going to be a problem. The Chiefs have been they've been relatively
it was
good.
The first time they played.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a problem the last time they played. I'm looking at the weather forecast. 23 degrees, no precipitation. Weather probably isn't a factor here. And I don't know who weather would favor in this game, honestly, because of the Josh Allen effect. I don't know that you don't want Josh Allen to have the ability to do what he did, quite frankly, last night against Pittsburgh, which is break off a 50-yard run. But it will be a fascinating game. Here we go again. It's become the great rivalry, in my opinion, in the NFL, because every time they play, it seems like there's a lot on the line. And, we talk about divisional rivalries and all that. To me, like when you see the same two teams meet up in the playoffs every year for a while, that breeds the best rivalry. You've got two of the best quarterbacks. You've got two of the best coaches, in my opinion. I'm very much Team McDermott as he faced a little heat this year. I love it, man. You wouldn't want anything else other than maybe the Bengals being healthy and being in the mix too. But this is what we wanted at the beginning of the year, right? That we want Kansas City Buffalo in the postseason. It's become that kind of rivalry.
Absolutely, man. Honestly, I love the entire slate for next weekend. I think from start to finish, we're gonna have to me, I don't see a bad game. Like I think this will be one of the more exciting divisional rounds in a while. It doesn't feel like anyone is in there and they're not supposed to be. Everyone's playing good towards the end of the season. So it's going to be a lot of fireworks for sure. I'm looking forward.
Let's look at next weekend. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. 869-1240 is that KFH hotline. What do you think, Chiefs fans? You ready for Buffalo? You subscribe to the theory that them going to Buffalo now is a better outcome than if Houston had to come to Kansas City? For all the reasons that we laid out there. Let us know what you think. Thank you for watching us on our video stream as well, which you can find on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. You can leave us comments there. Andrew chiming in. For you, Malcolm, he says that don't forget the Pistons won yesterday, too, for your Detroit love.
Man,
so we appreciate that.
I'm not looking at those guys.
Yeah, it's been rough there. We haven't talked a lot of NBA on the show. Too college basketball crazy. It is a K-State game day. Malcolm and Tommy, we'll get into that in hour number 2. We're going to continue the football conversation here. Jake Albracht, Malcolm Carter, Jad Chambers producing. Tommy will be in hour number 2. It's Sports Daily on a Tuesday.
watch.
All right, welcome back in, everybody. Glad to be here with you. It's Albracht and Carter here for hour number 1 today. Tommy and Malcolm will be in. So for those of you that haven't listened, Malcolm is a diehard Detroit sports fan, especially the Lions. I mean, what is that? So Malcolm, you've been a Lions fan forever. You finally taste a playoff victory. I was there probably at about your age with the Texas Rangers, about, I don't know, however long that was ago. And now, of course, we got our World Series, and that's a totally different experience. So I've been there as a long-suffering fan of a team. Chiefs fans had that for a long time. Many of a generation hadn't seen any success. But I just wonder, like, as you watch that, go back to the Stafford trade for Jared Goff. You ever think Jared Goff's going to lead you guys to that first playoff win? I don't think anybody gave them a chance.
I actually did, man. I wasn't too caught up in what folks were saying about Jared Goff. Now, what I will say is kind of a nod to Cam Newton here. He really needs some of those pieces around him to make him successful. I don't think he's like Matt Stafford, who's just like a gunslinger. But I do think that if we built a team around him, I didn't see why we couldn't simulate some of that same success. And I think a lot of that has ended up holding true for the Lions. We've drafted, I think, better than anyone the last 3 years. We've signed the necessary free agents. So to me, it just feels like we earned it. It doesn't feel like wow, like this is such a magical, like this is finally happening. I feel like, like we got better. We went 3-13, we went 9-8, and now we've progressed and gotten better as a team. And I think that's what good organizations do. I'm not going to go into too much into the regime before Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes, but we just needed a complete overlook. And I think JG is the perfect guy to lead that, is because he's just calm, cool, and collected, man. Like 3-13, and even through this season so far, he's been the same guy, giving the same answers, just being a good leader for the group, man. So I feel great. I feel great even past this season, just looking outwardly. We have so many young guys on rookie contracts, and it's just a really good position to be in. So I'm happy.
Yeah, it's and the thing about it is too, I think, is it's all sustainable. Even with Goff, like I this not some flash in the pan. He is a nice fit for what it is they want to do. Jared Goff's just 29 years old. Right? I think when we think about like long-term quarterbacks and the quarterbacks that are franchise guys, I think we almost felt like Goff would be this stopgap, right? This placeholder for whatever it is the Lions did post Stafford. But the reality is Jared Goff's 29 years old, right? Jared Goff, he had 4,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 12 picks this year. Like, I think for what the Lions want to be about, that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't think, I think that's enough for them. They're continuing to surround him with talent there. They're good at wide receiver. Could be a little better, but they're good. But they want to run the ball and they want to play defense, and they've shown us that. And I think that they can. And now as we look at their potential in the postseason, with Dallas out, the Lions become, I would think, who are 6-point favorites against the Bucs. They've got a shot here. And San Francisco is going to be really interesting to watch. Green Bay versus San Francisco should be fun, if nothing else. I don't know what we know about the Niners is when they're right, they're the best in football. I don't think there's any question about that. But when they're just a tick off, they're not only not the best team in football, they've lost 4 games in that scenario, right? When any one of their key guys, and their key guys would be Purdy, Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, McCaffrey, and I guess Trent Williams. So you're looking, that's kind of their Pro Bowl group. But if any of those guys are out, it totally seems to disrupt everything they're doing. So I think they've been on thin ice, but I do think they're the best. But absolutely Detroit could beat them. Detroit, Detroit wants to run the ball. They've played better defense. When you see the strength of their defense, it's kind of become the run defense, right? And it's going to start there if you're going to beat San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of going to start there too, by the way, if you're going to beat Tampa. Rashad White's been incredible the last half of the season.
Absolutely.
So I think they got a shot here. I think it's a tough ask, but I think they got a shot. You're likely going on the road to play San Francisco. I don't know if they're quite ready for that, but man, with their coach, by the way, are you in on Dan Campbell? I mean, you have to be, right? Like, how do you not want to run through a wall for that guy?
I think you have to really be from Detroit to understand why he's the perfect guy for us. Like when we talk about like putting your nose down, going to work, and just putting the work in, I think he's just the perfect embodiment of Detroit. And I feel like that's why you've seen the city embrace him and just embrace this team so much, because we just want some guys who are going to go out there and give it their all. I think if you go out there and things shake up a certain way and you lose, then that's one thing. But it just feels like we're prepared to play every week. Our energy is right, man. I'm one of the biggest Dan Campbell guys, and he's a players coach. He's been in the league. He was on the Lions on that 0-16 team. So I don't think that there's a better candidate for our team. I really don't see another coach for us for a long time. Dan Campbell's for sure the guy.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, he's not only the guy, he is he's something special right now. And that emotion, it bleeds through. And sometimes that wears off when you're not winning, but they've been winning, and I like it. It's a good story. All right, the other games here. Texans Ravens, 9.5 points for the Ravens. They've been the team that wins by big margins this year. Lamar's got to prove it. I don't know if Lamar is the reason that I have been I can tell you that he's not the reason that I've been hesitant on calling them as dominant as they quite frankly have been on paper. I think it's that they're just like they've had so many injuries and they're still good despite them. I just need to see it in the postseason. I need to see it in these big games. They don't scare me. Like the best of the Niners scares me more than the best of the Ravens, I guess, is one way I could put it. And so can the Texans go to Baltimore and win? I don't know. That's a big ask. But certainly the swag of the Texans and CJ Stroud, and as well as he's playing, and I can't believe they're at this point with all the injuries they've sustained, but here they are. Crazier things have happened. But it looks like a pretty good spot for the Ravens. But at least it's for Chiefs fans. At least it's the Texans and not the Steelers. We'll see. I don't know. But look, Lamar Jackson, playoff quarterback, has not been, the best. He's had some injuries, which makes it an unfair look. But it is still something that he's got to go get proved. He's 1-3 in the playoffs, Malcolm, with more interceptions than touchdowns. And, sort of like Dak a little bit, like at some point you got to buck those trends. Dak has not, and Lamar's got to do that if he wants to win. And I don't remember. So of their games, they were the home team in 2019 and 2020. They lost both of those playoff games. That was early in Lamar's career. And then in 21, they went on the road and beat Tennessee and then got beat by Buffalo.
Right.
So he's had a little experience in all of it, but he has not been good in the postseason. Like, has been bad, quite frankly, in the postseason, and he's got to buck that if they're going to do anything.
Yeah, I think the Ravens are going to look a lot differently this year than they have in the postseason, and I think the biggest thing is their defense. Like, to me, their defense is playing like just lights out. I think they're gonna come out this weekend and prove that why they have all those all pros on defense, and really that linebacker tandem. I think it's going to be tough for Houston because they're going to really make CJ Stroud one dimensional and make him throw the ball across the field. And I think that's when you'll see Baltimore call up some of those unique blitzes and get some pressure on him. So I really think that Houston, I don't want to say it don't have a chance. I do think if the game turns into a shootout, anything can happen. But I do think Ravens defense, just even beyond this game this weekend, I think they're going to be the biggest story in this postseason run for the Ravens. If they can hold teams to, 20 points, 19, in those type of margins. I think Lamar plus Justin Tucker, I think they can do enough to get points on the board. I don't know if we'll see a bunch of high scoring games from the Ravens this postseason. I think they're going to really lean on the defense to set the momentum for the team. But even still, I think the new passing attack with the Ravens, I think it'll be interesting mix up, something they haven't had in the playoffs since.
Yeah, it's it to me, it's the pass catchers are far better now than they have been for him.
Mhm.
What's Mark Andrews' status, by the way? I haven't checked in on him.
They let him off IR. He practiced with the team on Friday, so I would assume he's gearing up to be ready for the game. But I haven't seen reports on that. But he is off IR and back with the team.
Yeah, so if he comes back, then I mean, it will be fascinating because Likely's been good. So now you give him two tight ends, and you give him Zay Flowers, and you give him Beckham, right? And then they've got Bateman and all their other cast of it's as gifted a group as Lamar Jackson's ever had, for sure, which has a lot to do with why he's going to win the MVP this year. I don't know. I there's a part of me, like, I really want Lamar Jackson to succeed and buck the trend, because his story this year of the nobody wants him and all that stuff to MVP is fantastic. It's so good. And I love his game, but it's got to translate in these big moments. I mean, we all know that. That's the key for quarterbacks to take that next step and enter that next class, is you have to be able to win and be big time players in the postseason. And it's what's held some guys back in their careers from, it held Tony Romo back from being considered, all-time good at Phillip Rivers. Like, you can go down the list of guys that continuously got to the playoffs but couldn't make it through. Lamar Jackson's sort of hovering right there right now, and he's got a good opportunity here. Just give him one. I mean, I'm looking at it. He's had the reality is he has not had any good playoff games. He's played 4. None of them have been good. So for him, it's like, can you just get that first one, right? Can you get that first game where you come out and you look like the MVP of the league in a playoff game? And that will, I think, help shake it a little bit. But until we see that, and if I'm sitting here as a Chiefs fan today, I'm just not worried about any team you got to play. I think they absolutely can beat any team that they'll play. And so that's where this all circles back for me, is what does it mean for the Chiefs? We'll get into that in the next segment in just a second. But the Packers and the Niners is the other game at a brief look at. Look, the Niners are 10-point favorites at home. I don't know if the air can go out of the Packers' sails here. I think what happened in Dallas has a whole lot to do with Dallas.
Yeah.
But I don't want to take that away from Green Bay. I've absolutely been on board with the way they've rebuilt this. I think it's been unbelievable how they've transitioned. It all sort of hinged on Jordan Love, of course, but man, they have surrounded him with so many good young players that they're pretty dangerous. Like, now that they're kind of healthy and if you haven't, probably if you're a betting man or a fantasy football player, you know how good their young receivers are and how many of them that they have. But if you're a casual football fan, you probably never heard of any of these guys. But they've got several of them, Dobbs and Reed, and now Bo Melton looks pretty good. And, we haven't even seen Christian Watson. I don't know if he's playing or not, but like, they've got a bunch of them. And Luke Musgrave's really good. He's back healthy. Like, all of a sudden, they've got 5 or 6 guys that can really hurt you in the pass game. And if Jordan Love plays well, why not? We've seen Brock Purdy struggle, right? Is it, Purdy's not impervious to, it hasn't happened very often, but it's happened. You make a couple big plays defensively, and who knows? I mean, I don't think I'm comfortable laying 10 points. I'll tell you that right now. But
yeah, 10
I don't
points
know
is a
that
lot there.
That's a lot. For a team that's as hot as Green Bay is. I mean, momentum means everything in the NFL. And Green Bay's won their last 3. Their last 4, most recently in that game against Dallas. Now, again, Carolina, Minnesota, Chicago, meh. Dallas, who knows what that is. I definitely could see a scenario where San Francisco just comes out and stomps them. I just don't know if I'm comfortable putting my money on that.
Mm.
But this Green Bay story has been remarkable. And kind of like the Chiefs and Bills, these two teams seem to play every year in the playoffs.
Yeah, I'll really be interested to see because Aaron Jones, I mean, I think he set the tone for the game in a lot of ways. And I think
No question.
Green Bay went into that game really, I think, executing the exact game plan that they set out for the week, with some help from Dallas. Uh, but I do think San Francisco is going to take care of business. One thing that I think they have that Dallas necessarily doesn't is a solid run game. Because I think even when you watch the Lions game against the Cowboys, like we were able to run the ball effectively as well. So when you're getting 6 yards a pop on every run, and then that just you're looking at 2nd and 4 every. I mean that's an offensive coordinator's dream. So I do think that the 49ers will make those adjustments, but it'll be a good game for sure.
49ers are going to take the air out of the ball. They're going to run, run, run. I'm with you. They're going to try to run like crazy. That's why you look like 50 points. Seems too big for me. 50 points, a lot of points in a game where I think both teams would probably like to run the ball. But we'll see. It should be. I think I'm excited about these divisional round matchups. Look, championship weekend will be better, I think, no matter what the outcomes are this weekend. But I think we're going to get some good games. All right, we'll dig just a little bit further into the Chiefs. You'll have Dan Israel here to talk about it all at the top of the next hour. Let's give away some HTO on our way out, Jad. Let's do a free iced tea, which is available at the Wichita West location, Wichita East location, and in Derby. And we'll give away a free Brewhouse coffee drink, which is available at the East location in Wichita and in Derby. One of each to our first caller to the KFH hotline at 869-1240. Good luck, everybody. We'll be back with more Sports Daily right after this. Welcome back in, everybody. Sports Daily here on KFH. Congratulations to Misty for winning some HTO and Brewhouse coffee. It's cold outside.
Oh, yeah.
Malcolm. I know you're from Detroit, so this is nothing new to you, just like folks here, but this sucks.
Oh, my goodness. Man, I honestly, man, once you start talking about negative temperatures and feels like you really can just count me out. I'd rather just stay bundled up, man. I don't know how those Chiefs fans did it.
Like, do we really need college to get canceled today because it's cold? Like, I don't want to be old man on his rocking chair on the front porch and talk about being soft, but like, don't you think 18-year-olds know how to put a pair of gloves on and zip up the jacket? Like, we need to cancel college for cold weather. That seems a bit excessive.
I mean, if you got
snow's gone,
if you got to
roads
walk
are
from class,
safe.
you got to walk from class across campus. It's negative, 10. It only takes a couple minutes to get frostbite. So,
not if you have a jacket and gloves on. I watched 50,000 people at Arrowhead sit for 3.5 hours at 30 below with their shirts off. Like, I get the dangers, and I'm not trying to downplay the dangers of dangerously cold temperatures. But I think adults can figure out how to bundle up to get from class to class. Like, canceling class because of cold weather? I don't know, man.
I hope you don't have no college students listening right now. They're like, stop talking. Don't say that.
Yeah, we don't want. Now, I wouldn't want to go either if I was in college. I would want to sleep in too. But I guess any excuse you can have. But let's come on now. Like, let's just be real about this. The little guys, yes, that have to get off and on a bus and maybe have to walk to school. That's one thing. But college kids, I don't know. I hope there's not something I've offended by saying that. Okay. Chiefs Bills. Just real quick, and I know you and Tommy will get more into this in the second hour. I think that when we look back at this season, how easy do you think it is to disregard what we saw for, I don't know, 75 or 80% of this season for the Chiefs, and to wipe that away and just think about now moving forward? Is just because, to me, some of the things that plagued them for that large portion of the season, they can sort of eliminate now. Now, they had a key penalty in that game on Saturday, right? That nullified a touchdown. So they still haven't done it completely clean. But I do think you can just sort of not even consider anything that's happened really up until the last couple of weeks of the regular season when you think about the Chiefs and their chances to win a Super Bowl. I don't think we're going to see them give the ability to those problems. They're going to minimize all that, I think, moving forward. And it almost does create like an entirely new season to look at with the Chiefs.
Yeah, I would say on offense, I think, like you said, shrinking it down the playbook a little bit, simplifying things to where you're getting the ball into the right people's hands and you aren't necessarily taking some of the same risks they did earlier in the season. So I do think they'll be able to mitigate some of that, but I do think that it falls on the defense still. I still think that their corners are a little handsy. I still think that that they are susceptible to the deep ball. So I don't think that they are completely polished up on that side of the ball. And if we are getting into those games where it's a shootout and it's, third, fourth quarter, and we're talking 21-21, and they need to go down there and score consistently, scoring touchdowns consistently, I still feel like there's still that component there where I don't know if they're going to be able to sustain that many drives back to back to back like you'll need to, especially in a game against Buffalo, where I feel like that's where the game might boil down to. So I'm still where I'm looking at for the Chiefs, but I do think a lot of their bigger issues, at least on the offensive side of the ball, is getting worked out.
I do too. I think it's worked out. And I think that it is going to be a blast. And I hope that Chiefs fans enjoy this appropriately, because it's been a wild ride to get to Chiefs Bills round 7, but it's here and it's in Buffalo this time. And I think it's going to be awesome. I think it's going to be tight. I think you're going to see all the things you wanted to see. Two great quarterbacks going at it when they need big plays. I think this is going to be awesome. I think it's going to be just as awesome as all these other playoff games have been between these two teams. All right, you and Tommy will have Dan Israel to talk about that coming up in the next segment. You'll get ready for this K-State game. By the way, Wildcat fans, you can catch K-State men's basketball broadcast with the voice of the Wildcats, Wyatt Thompson, right here on 97.5 and 1240 KFH. Search for KFH on the Odyssey app at game time. That game tips at 7, pregame coverage at 6. You guys will have that and more. It's Tommy and Malcolm coming up in hour number 2. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Don't go away. Sports Daily continues after this.
Jacob Albracht, Tommy Castor. This is Sports Daily on Wichita's #1 sports radio, 97.5 and 1240 KFH.
Caught! Touchdown! Kansas City!
Hey, Chiefs Kingdom, we have you covered. Joining Sports Daily Live, executive producer of the Chiefs Radio Network, Dan Israel.
All right, welcome back in, everybody. It's hour number 2 of Sports Daily here on KFH. Little tag team action. Jacob Albracht out for hour number 2. I'm Tommy Castor in for Jacob. Malcolm Carter joins me in hour number 2 today. And we are joined on the KFH hotline by the executive producer of the Chiefs Radio Network, Dan Israel. Dan, welcome to the show. Have you thawed out yet from the weekend from Arrowhead on Saturday night?
Yeah, who would have ever thought, Tommy, that we'd be going to Buffalo and it'd be warmer than what a home game was. I don't think I'd ever consider that, but yeah, it was definitely a cold game. I think I've done almost 800 games and by far the coldest one I've ever done.
Yeah, Buffalo's forecast for this weekend sounds downright balmy compared to what we had at Arrowhead on Saturday. Let's talk about the conditions a little bit here, Dan, from the game on Saturday night. Of course, just absolutely frigid conditions, as we all know. Minus 30 wind chills, and you could see it as the game played out. You could tell, the way that things were impacting, the weather was impacting the game, even going so far as Patrick Mahomes' helmet cracking. What did you take away from the way that the conditions actually impacted the game for both teams?
I felt like the Chiefs adjusted so quickly to the elements, and I just felt like the Miami Dolphins never did. And I thought it was interesting in the week preceding, you had Andy Reid and Mike McDaniel, the two head coaches, both asked about the elements. And Andy Reid said, hey, it is what it is. We play the games when they're scheduled. And that's all he said. And Mike McDaniel went on a dissertation of how they were going to handle it for 8 minutes. And I really feel like it was in the head of the Dolphins. And look, how could it not be? I mean, it was that cold. But I felt like the Chiefs just handled the elements so well. Mahomes came out in his first couple of throws. You could tell he was, having to deal with the wind. I think it was really the wind more than the cold. But he made great adjustments, and the rest of the game, it seemed to just be not a factor. It was really kind of surprising because it was not your just cold game. This was a bitter, abnormal cold game. I mean, this was, so one of those things where I think you can mind over matter elements when you're talking, 15 to 20 degrees. When you're talking 20 degrees below zero, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And nice to meet you, Dan. I wanted to talk specifically about the Chiefs' game plan on offense. It looked like they hadn't really skipped a beat in terms of how they perform in the playoffs. It seemed like they had everything going that they typically do have going. So can you just talk about offensively how they were able to sustain those drives and, get points on the board?
Yeah, Malcolm, I think one of the things we saw out of that contest was kind of the old Chiefs. We saw just a glimpse of what this team looks like when it plays well. And I got to give a lot of kudos to the offensive line, who I felt did a fantastic job in the first half in particular. I thought the holes they were opening, I almost think I could have gotten through those holes. Pacheco had these massive openings, and he was seeing, his vision was really good, and they were running the football so well. And I just felt like that was the offensive line. And again, in the face of these elements, you get your hands out there and your hands get cold, and that's what linemen use, is their hands. And so I think everybody just did such a good job in that first half. Now, the Dolphins adjusted, and we had to make some changes as well. But I felt like really what you saw out of the first half of that game was a team that came out and had a fast start, which I know we went 3-and-out in the first possession, but I think that was a little bit more of a test and a statement than it was, an actual failure to drive. The second possession I thought was just a really clean drive all the way down the field. They were consistent. They seemed to control the clock with it. They seemed to control the chains. And so I felt like that was kind of the old Chiefs, where maybe not the speed of scoring, but the consistency of driving the football and really controlling the elements. So I was excited to see them come out with a fast start. We ask for that every week. I know they want to do that every week, but it seems like sometimes they come out and they're not even matched the energy of the opponent. In last Saturday night, they not only matched the energy of the Miami Dolphins, they exceeded it.
Outside of a garbage time turnover, the Chiefs also handled the ball really well, which is something that they've struggled with. And that was, I think, a talking point going into the conditions for the game on Saturday. The couple things, though, Dan, that I did notice is that, this identity, the identity of this team, it continued on in the playoffs. And so, of course, we've talked about it before about not expecting anything different from this team. They still had drops. Travis Kelce had a couple of them. Jawan Taylor was still penalized. They still had struggles in the red zone, but they found ways to overcome that. And the path for this team is running the football with Isaiah Pacheco and, of course, really elite defense. Is there anything that indicates to you that as they move forward in the playoffs, that identity will change at all? Or is this what the Chiefs are for the rest of this season?
Well, I do think, it's a great question. And I do think the identity is going to be there. I don't think it's going to be there to the level that maybe we've seen it. I think it's still unusual to see Kelce dropping that many footballs. Was that the elements? Was that just the continuation of what this season has been? I don't really know, but I do think, the emergence of Pacheco's running game throughout this season, and let me throw in there CEH too, because he had some tough runs, not only this last Saturday, but the preceding weeks, man. He just seems to grind out some yards when, you wouldn't expect that. It seems like a renewed CEH. So I think that identity, I expect it to be consistent. I do think, the offensive line is probably going to continue what it is, but I think the last thing you got to throw in there is the defense. And when I get worried about, I think, gosh, man, sometimes, we're not scoring 30 points anymore. We're, can we win a football game with 17? Can we win a football game with 21? Well, yeah, if the defense can hold them to 7 points, you can. I mean, Todd Blackledge could win that football game. You know what I mean? It's crazy when you think how good this defense is, that your offense doesn't need to be the 2019 Chiefs. It doesn't need to be the 2022 Chiefs. They just need to be able to go down and protect the football. I thought the biggest difference was the lack of mistakes, or the volume and lack of mistakes. And so if they can continue that through the postseason, then we might be able to highlight the old adage of defense wins championships.
Absolutely. I was talking with Jacob earlier in the first hour, and we were talking about just how the defense is really going to be the tone setter going forward. So I'm glad you said that. But I did want to ask one more question on the offensive side of the ball. And I'm a Lions fan, and I was at Arrowhead week 1. I was like, who is this Rashee Rice guy? I hadn't heard much about him, didn't know much about him, but he's eventually pretty much evolved into the number one target for the Chiefs offense. So I would love to ask you, just as the season's progressed, what has it been like watching his progression, and just kind of what's the feel like about Rice in the Chiefs Kingdom?
Well, I think they're so impressed, first of all, with his work ethic. He's for a rookie, you don't tend to see a rookie come out of college and have a pro work ethic. They kind of have to learn that. They kind of have to take that next step. And he's done that. And I think, we were told all along the season, he's getting a little better, and he's getting a little better. And there were times we questioned it, but he has really emerged as not only a favorite target for Mahomes, but a big play potential target. He's doing the things now that he wasn't doing early in the season that were preventing that, coming back to the football, catching the ball on the run, making that second cut, all these things that he was kind of struggling with early in the season, he's now overcome. And I feel like not only has he kind of passed that rookie wall, I never even saw him really hurdle it. I mean, it felt like he just went right through it. And so I guess you kind of have to say at this point, he's developed into a legitimate number one. And I think the coaching staff is very pleased with him. I think the guy who's probably the happiest is 15. If you're throwing the football and you've struggled to have guys that you put the ball in the hands of, hold on to that ball, and suddenly you got someone that can do that and then can get some yak afterwards. I just think that, he's going to – the last thing I would say about Rice too here is his effectiveness forces the defense to game plan against him. That means that's that much less manpower they can put on Travis Kelce. So I think it opens things up for Kelce too. So we needed it. We asked for it, and I think we're finally getting it. But it's fun to watch this kid develop because it feels like, to me, he gets better every single week, especially these last 6 weeks. He's gotten just he's fun to watch, right? I mean, it's one of those things where it's no longer hope, it's reality.
Dan Israel, executive producer of the Chiefs Radio Network, joining us here on Sports Daily. Dan, let's look ahead to the Buffalo Bills. Of course, yesterday, their game postponed 24 hours. And Buffalo looked great. And of course, they were able to take advantage of some of the things that the Steelers weren't doing well. Tackling was one of them, but Buffalo is going to be facing a much better tackling team in Kansas City this weekend. The one thing, and going back to real quick with the Dolphins, the Chiefs defense did a really good job of limiting the big plays from Miami outside of that one Tyreek Hill catch and touchdown score. Josh Allen lives on the big plays, and he also is known for shredding blitzes. Steve Spagnuolo loves to blitz. We've seen this matchup multiple times before, including earlier this season in Arrowhead. What do you anticipate the way that Steve Spagnuolo will go about attacking Josh Allen and that Buffalo Bills offense?
Yeah, I think, when you look at the Miami Dolphins and the tremendous job that they did, 1 in 12 third down conversion, I mean, it's just an outstanding number. However, you have to factor in, I felt like the Dolphins were a little bit of a paper tiger anyway. They'd only beaten one team with a winning record all year, the Dallas Cowboys, and they only beat them by 2 points. And so you also factor in Tua Tagovailoa only had no playoff experience. So this was his first playoff game. I feel like it was much easier for Spagnuolo to confuse Tua than it's going to be to confuse Josh Allen. This is by no means going to be an easy game. I feel like this is going to be probably a one of those games that if you go back a couple of years ago to that tremendous Bills contest where it was the last man standing. While I don't think offensively, I don't think either the Bills or the Chiefs are the same. I think both teams are more balanced now than they used to be. They both have better defenses now than they used to. I will tell you that the Bills lost a couple of guys on defense yesterday, and so that's going to be a struggle when you talk about stopping Isaiah Pacheco and you're down linebackers. That's not a good thing, but I feel like for Spagnuolo, he definitely knows Allen, and he'll come up with something for Allen, but Allen's a tremendous quarterback, and I mean, I feel like he's good at making reads. He's harder to confuse. In those legs, he can run the football. Man, yeah, I mean, when's the last time we saw a run like that out of a quarterback?
Yeah.
Maybe Colin Kaepernick
Yep.
a dozen years ago. I mean, it's unbelievable, and so I feel like that added threat. This is going to be one of the biggest tests. In my opinion, this is going to be one of the biggest tests. I think it'll be easier if we progress and we played the Ravens and we played Lamar Jackson. I feel like that's going to be an easier game than possibly this Bills game. I just think we match up well against the Bills, and they have a lot of weapons in their arsenal.
Absolutely. I have one quick question, too, about the Bills, specifically the 2 tight ends that they use. They really like to use them in a lot of different ways, and they're also really good blocking tight ends. You just talk to maybe how the Chiefs plan to game plan for those 2 tight ends, and there's the different packages that they use them in. Sometimes their hands are in the dirt, sometimes they're lined up in the trip. So what do you expect to see there?
Yeah, it's very similar to kind of how we do things with our tight ends, and as if the receivers and Allen don't have a good and a good enough connection. This rookie Dalton Kincaid is really playing well, and he's very Travis Kelce like, in the way he plays. He can block, he can catch, he can do everything, and so I feel like there's just a lot of increased pressure on that defensive line to make sure that you're stunting these guys, that you're getting them, not letting them get free releases, because we know what happens when Travis Kelce gets that, right? And so I feel like it'll be a test for the Chiefs. It is something that's different for the Bills. The Bills, not that they haven't had good tight ends, because they have, but I feel like their increased play to the tight ends is something we haven't seen out of Bills previously.
Before we let you go, Dan, let's talk injuries very quickly. You touched on it in regards to Buffalo. And I think a big talking point going into the game this weekend is that Kansas City is healthier than Buffalo is, and they get 2 more days of rest because of the postponement with the Buffalo game yesterday. So what do we know injury-wise, especially for Kansas City? Any major concerns going into this weekend?
I mean, I don't really think so. I mean, the one thing you'd like to get back is Wanya Morris, who was in the concussion protocol, which I expect he will get back. You just can never have enough offensive linemen, it seems like. And so I don't really think there's much. I didn't see too much going on in the locker room. I do think it was kind of interesting. A couple of different players, literally their hearts were in their bellies, they said, when they went into the huddle and looked at the hole in Mahomes' helmet.
Oh.
He said it just gave us this panic attack as if he had a hole in his head. And but Mahomes is fine. Kelsey's his normal self. I think your playmakers, Pacheco's beat up, of course, because that's the way he runs. Nick Bolton's still struggling through that. He's got that cast on, but I think you're right. We're in a healthier position with a couple of extra days rest. It may be enough to offset the home field advantage that the Bills fans are going to try to bring to this thing. And hopefully the snow will stay out of there, because I don't want any snowballs. I remember that in 1990, in the 93 playoffs, people throwing ice balls at it. It was not fun.
Quick follow-up to that. Do we know anything about Jerick McKinnon? I know he's on injured reserve. I know he had surgery like a week and a half ago. Is there a chance we see him as the playoffs move on, or should we not count on that?
I've heard that not for this game. I think if we could progress past, there may be consideration there, but I'm supposed to get an update on him Thursday. So okay. I may know more for you here coming up, but right now, yeah. And, I'll tell you, again, with CEH, I just feel like these guys, and even I'd even say, Pirine, I feel like they've really done a good job of stepping up, because I thought the loss of Jerick McKinnon was going to be very significant. He is so effective on third down, and I expected there to be a huge step down, and we really haven't experienced that. So kudos to those guys for answering the bell when it rung.
Well, of course, the divisional round matchup, you guys will be headed to Orchard Park. It's the Sunday primetime game. Anything big scheduled planned on the radio network for the game this weekend?
Not yet. The downside to the playoffs is that the schedule comes out, really midway through what would normally be our planning cycles. And so we knew that we were going to either play Sunday night or Saturday, but, you're working 2 separate games and 2 separate crews. It's a little bit intense today. By the end of today, I hope to kind of be back on schedule. I was pretty impressed with the Chiefs released the itinerary for Buffalo almost immediately at the end of yesterday's game, which is pretty impressive when you think about what goes into traveling, Tommy. I mean, think about, you got to have a hotel in this city, you got to have a hotel in that city, right. Police escorts, buses, there's a lot that goes into that. So our traveling staff is one of the best, and I'm so impressed by everything they've done. We had that flex night earlier in the season where they moved us and they scrambled and got everything done. The Germany game, it's really incredible. It's an immense amount of work, and it's a very important job. I think is a lot underrated. We depend on those guys to make the routines happen, right? If they don't get it right, then the routine falls apart from the very beginning. We all know how players and coaches need their routine. So the one thing I can tell you about this game is it's going to be another epic one, right? So whatever you do, you're going to want to make it an appointment to sit, listen to this game, because I just don't think there's a Bills-Chiefs game that I would want to miss at this juncture. This Mahomes-Allen rivalry, if you want to call it that, is, I think, one of the best we've had in the last 2 decades.
Yeah, it's definitely turned into one of the most premier rivalries in the NFL, and we'll get it in the playoffs this weekend in primetime. Bills and Chiefs, and it's going to be just an incredible matchup. It always is when these two teams square up. Dan, thanks again for your time. Enjoy the tropical weather in Orchard Park this weekend.
I'll try my best. You can only eat buffalo wings down to a certain temperature, and then you got to stop.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it, guys.
Yep. Thanks, Dan. Dan Israel, executive producer of the Chiefs Radio Network, joining us here on Sports Daily. We'll take a timeout. On the other side, we'll get into a little bit of what Dan talked about and look ahead to the Chiefs and Bills. Also, K-State basketball in action tonight against Baylor. We'll give you a preview of that game and a whole lot more. Jad Chambers producing. I'm Tommy Castor along with Malcolm Carter at Sports Daily here on KFH. We'll be right back.
You gotta hear this.
Go ahead. I think I want to hear this.
Sports Daily is on KFH.
All right, welcome back, everybody. It's Sports Daily on KFH. I'm Tommy Castor, along with Malcolm Carter. Jad Chambers producing. Our thanks to Dan Israel, executive producer of the Chiefs Radio Network, joining us here on Sports Daily. If you missed any of that conversation, as always, you can go back and listen to it for free on the Odyssey app. Malcolm, I think a couple of really interesting things from that conversation with Dan, really as it relates to moving forward this weekend against the Buffalo Bills. And you asked him about the way that Buffalo uses the tight ends. Both Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid had big days yesterday for Buffalo. And then, of course, Josh Allen on the ground running the football. It's going to present challenges, of course, for Steve Spagnuolo and the Chiefs defense, but they've played the Bills before. They know how to go and battle that Buffalo offense. What kind of changes do you think will be in place, if any, for Steve Spagnuolo and the Chiefs defense?
Yeah, I think they'll try to give Josh Allen a lot of different looks. I think right now, the way that they simplified their offense, he's really going if his first read is there, he's taking it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot different. I think he's growing out of that, like, I need to make the big play mentality. So I think Chiefs defense will really be looking to take away that first read, whether that's one of the tight ends, whether that's Stephon Diggs or maybe like an out or a slant. They'll try to take that first option away, make Josh hitch a little bit. I think that when you start getting him to do that, his feet start dancing a little bit in the pocket. That's where you start to see some of those mistakes happen. So I think priority number one will be to take away that first read.
Yeah, and I know that when we talked about it with Dan about how the Chiefs defense, they love to blitz. That's one thing that Steve Spagnuolo does a lot. He blitzes a lot. He blitzes in critical times a lot too. He's not afraid to do that. Josh Allen historically is really good against the blitz, and that's really when, he can use his legs to beat you. So I wonder if we're going to see different packages where maybe they tease a blitz or they simulate a blitz and then drop back into coverage. I don't exactly know what that's going to look like, and I'm sure it'll be situational depending on what happens in the game. But that's the thing about Josh Allen, is that for the number of times that people have been critical about him and his turnovers, because he is prone to throwing interceptions and that sort of thing, he definitely can beat you not only with his arm but with his legs, and that's one thing that Allen does probably better than any other quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that will be where the Bills will try to make their mark on that game. Because I think more often than not, you shorten the game down for the Chiefs and you make those possessions really count. I think with the way the Chiefs offense is looking right now, that bodes really well for the Bills. So I think that you'll probably see James Cook 15 carries. You'll probably see Josh Allen anywhere between, I think, 7 to 10 carries. And I think that they'll try to use that. And I think if they're able to get 5-6 yards a pop and they're able to move the ball like that, I think that'll play right into where I believe the Bills' game plan will be looking to go. And then really just giving it back to the Chiefs and seeing if they're able to go. But I think touchdowns will be the name of the game. Whoever can go down there, score in the red zone, I think will ultimately win the game.
I'm going to throw a theory out at you right now, and tell me if you think I'm crazy. We talked about it on the show yesterday, and Jacob and I were actually surprisingly on the same page about it, but I want to get your thoughts on this. I actually think that the Bills beating the Steelers and Kansas City going to Buffalo this weekend is a better path for Kansas City to make it to the Super Bowl than the other way around. If the Steelers had won and then Houston comes to Arrowhead. And the reason I say that is because, yeah, you go to Buffalo and the Bills are an extremely talented football team, but I think that Houston has an opportunity to beat Baltimore in Baltimore this weekend. If that happens, then you've got the AFC Championship game right back at Arrowhead with the Chiefs and the Texans next weekend. Is that a crazy thought? I mean, do you think that it's better to have that home game? It's not happening now, but would have had that home game against Houston this weekend as opposed to going to Buffalo and then back to Kansas City potentially for an AFC Championship game?
Yeah, I think I don't think it's any secret the Chiefs play better at home. I think they do have a true home field advantage when it comes to not only crowd noise but the elements as well. So I don't think that that's necessarily a crazy theory. I think when you're in the locker room, I don't think you care who you play, where you go. You want to get to that next phase. But I think when you're looking at it from that perspective, the way the Texans are looking right now, I would almost want to take that extra week of film, see what they got going on, because the way they looked, the way CJ Stroud's looking right now, they're truly a problem. So I think having a familiar foe in this game I think leads a little bit more into how the Chiefs want to play right now. So I actually don't think that's a crazy theory. Actually, now that you mentioned it, it does have some validity to it.
I'm sure that you and Jacob discussed it in hour number one when it was the two of you. I'm sure you're feeling pretty good about the way the NFC is lining out for the Lions right now.
Oh yeah. I mean, hey, I will say I wanted that rematch in Dallas. I think we were going to go out there and we were going to dominate, but Packers took care of business. So I'm not too concerned there. But I mean, bring the Bucks on. We already played them once this year. Pretty much our entire team was hurt that game. We didn't have Gibbs. Montgomery was out. We had injuries across the field, and now we're actually getting some guys back for this game. James Houston, he's got off IR. I think he'll be back this week. So I mean, it looks beautiful to me. I'm not scared about going out to San Francisco and playing the NFC Championship out there. But deep down, I really did want that rematch with Dallas, man. I wanted to go down there. Oh, just get that rematch, man. That would have meant everything. But I'll take another home game in Detroit. Ford Field's going to be rocking. Those ticket prices are ridiculous again. So I'm definitely happy, and I'll take Baker Mayfield for sure.
Hey, I'm glad that we had a really competitive game between the Lions and the Rams. That was the only one out of the 6 games. It was a really, in my mind, kind of a disappointing weekend as far as the quality of the games. I just felt like, and I know the elements played into some of that, but just blowouts left and right, except for the Lions and the Rams. So I'm glad we had that. Hopefully we'll have more competitive games this weekend. Who's a more disappointing team to you, the Cowboys or the Eagles, after their first round exits?
I think you got to say the Cowboys. I think the Eagles, they have some glaring holes, especially on the back end, but even on the offensive side of the ball that I didn't think they were going to be able to overcome anyway. But I think with Dallas, man, for starters, I feel like they were out coached from the jump. Even from them taking the opening drive down for 7, I just don't think that they were prepared or schematically ready for that type of game. Because I was saying in the first hour, they were able to do essentially anything they wanted to do. If that was run the ball with Aaron Jones and make it a second and manageable, if it was, throw it to the pylons, if it was throwing it across the middle, they were able to do essentially anything that they wanted to do. So I was a little taken back at one. Did they sack Jordan Love? Like, did they get?
I don't feel like they got to him at all.
I don't think they even touched him, man. I don't think he ever touched the ground. So I would say more disappointed in Dallas. One, not being able to create pressure. I think that was something Detroit was able to do in some of our matchups with Green Bay. We were able to get home. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I mean, that their game plan couldn't have went even more worse than how that game started. CeeDee Lamb and Dak were not on the same page. Dak looked like a deer in the headlights a little bit out there.
Yeah.
So I would say I'm a little more disappointed in how they came out. And they were at home. And they won the NFC East. So
I don't know. I feel like, and I get what you're saying. I feel like what's even more disappointing are the Philadelphia Eagles. And the reason for that, I mean, you're coming off of a Super Bowl appearance. They were so strong until about the last month and a half or so. And it, to me, looks like Nick Sirianni has lost the team. You watched them last night. They had no interest in being in that game. They had no interest in tackling. And I know that the Cowboys fell behind big against the Packers. I never really felt like, even though the Cowboys had the Cowboys had gotten down big, I never felt like they had lost their fight. Right? I mean, they got it to within a couple of touchdowns late in the game. I never really felt like they had given up. And we haven't heard a whole lot about Mike McCarthy losing the locker room. I think that he'll probably be out of a job. But I feel like Nick Sirianni lost that team last night, and they just didn't have any interest in playing in that game, I felt like.
Yeah, it looked like they limped into that matchup a little bit. Maybe that's why I would say I wasn't too surprised. I think if you factor in that last month of football, they didn't look like a playoff team.
Yeah.
So going into it, I think Tampa Bay had everything to play for. They had no expectations. They're playing the former NFC champ from last year. So, I mean, I think they just went out there and executed their game plan. I think they were the better team going into that game, and it showed, I think, at every level. Offensive line, defensive line. The Bucs defensive line was creating pressure. They were wreaking havoc. Linebackers were playing well. They were flying to the ball. So I just don't think I think the Eagles just kind of limped into the playoffs, man. They started off the year hot. I don't think if they started off the year, I don't even know if they would even made the playoffs.
Yeah, and now we're keeping our eyes on whether or not Mike McCarthy and or Nick Sirianni are out of a job, and then if either one of them or both of them potentially are, who would be on the short list, to replace them? I think that there are a couple of big names out there, so we got to keep our eyes on all of that. But of course, the divisional rounds are set. The game that we care most about, well, us except for Malcolm with the Lions, but our divisional game, Kansas City, of course, they play the primetime game on Sunday night, the final game in the divisional round. Let's step aside for a timeout, and we'll come back. We'll talk a little bit about K-State basketball and their game tonight against Baylor. We'll do that on the other side. Jad Chambers producing the program. The KFH hotline is open at 869-1240. Sports Daily coming right back. Welcome back, everybody. Sports Daily on a Tuesday. Tommy Castor, Malcolm Carter, and for Jacob Albracht, Jad Chambers producing the program. All right, Malcolm, tonight, Kansas State basketball back in action. We'll have all the coverage right here with Wyatt Thompson on KFH. Taking on the Baylor Bears. The Wildcats fall by 1 point in Lubbock over the weekend to Grant McCasland and the Texas Tech Red Raiders. And now you've got Jerome Tang's former boss, Scott Drew, with the Baylor Bears, coming to Manhattan. It's a good bounce back opportunity for the Wildcats, but it's not going to be easy. Baylor is always good. They're 14-2. And I know, Baylor, of course, they've got their sights set on another Big 12 title. A road win in Manhattan against the Wildcats would be a really good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're in for a good game here. I think, like you mentioned, there's some emotion that is in this game. Two teams that I think will be there in March trying to compete for the big dance. So I'm really looking forward to this matchup. They got the spread at Baylor favored 1.5. So I mean that really can go either way. So I'm really looking forward to more than anything is the guard play. Baylor and Kansas State both have really good guard play that account for a lot of their points. So I know they're going to battle it out from tip. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, that 1.5 point spread, that was interesting when I saw that, because I thought it would have been a little bit bigger towards Baylor, just because of the body of work that Baylor has had this season and the recent, I don't want to call it struggles for Kansas State. I mean, they lost by a point to Texas Tech, but they handled UCF in their opening Big 12 contest. So it's not like the Wildcats have really struggled. I just thought that spread would have been a little bit bigger. Baylor, here's the interesting thing. They played Cincinnati in their last game. Baylor is averaging 86 points a game. They only scored 62 against Cincinnati in their last time out. And so I don't know if that was a lack of shooting from Baylor's offense, or if Cincinnati just did a really good job locking them down. But that's kind of an anomaly. That's something that we're not used to seeing from Baylor, scoring that many points, but then only getting 62 in their last game out. Might be an opportunity there for the Wildcats to take advantage of.
Yeah, and the Wildcats, they are a good defensive team, and I think they play even better at home. So, I mean, like you said, 1.5 is definitely a pick'em type of game. Definitely expected Baylor to maybe be more of like the 3.5 range, but like you said, K-State, they're going to come out there and they got something to play for. Any team that goes out and loses by 1 and feels like they had the game, they're going to come out there wanting to get that dub. So it's going to be a slugfest for sure. I'm definitely probably leaning towards the under on this one.
Yeah, I don't know. That 1.5. I'm leaning towards taking K-State to cover. At home in Bramlage, bouncing back from the game in Lubbock over the weekend. Again, I know Baylor is tough. I know that we all know Scott Drew. We all know what the Baylor Bears take care of. But man, I like that line as it relates to Kansas State at 1.5. Are you surprised at all by what we've seen from a couple of these Wildcat players, specifically Cam Carter, who is a guy that, was a kind of a reserve player, bench player a year ago, has really stepped into a role where he is kind of the primary offensive weapon for the Wildcats?
Yeah, I think when you kind of flash back to K-State last year, how they like to run their offense, I think that they are kind of that guard-centered offense where there is a lot of onus put on the guards to not only make stuff happen, but to make difficult shots.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily surprise me that much that Cam specifically has been doing very well. A lot of times, a lot of guys, they just need that opportunity. They need those minutes to get those shots up as the season goes on. I think he's only getting better, man. He's shooting a really decent percentage. He shoots the three well. He shoots the free throws extremely well too. So, like I said earlier, the guard play is going to really be where I'm looking at. I think whoever can come out and take advantage of the other, and maybe create some turnovers. I think it'll be the story of the game.
Kansas State, especially in the game in Lubbock over the weekend, it was a game of runs. They were hot for a while, then they went ice cold, lost that lead. I mean, they had an 11-point halftime lead, and Texas Tech comes back in the second half, and they get the victory. And Jacob and I have discussed it multiple different times about just where that the offensive production will come from and who you can rely on. It's Cam Carter for sure. But then outside of that, who is it from a game-to-game basis? We've seen it be Arthur Kaluma at times. Tyler Perry continues a disappointing season coming into Manhattan. I just don't know where they find that offensive spark when they need it the most. They're not getting a ton of production from the bench, and so I don't know if expanding the bench minutes is the way to go, because we haven't really seen a whole lot of that this season from this team. But it concerns me that really outside of a player like Cam Carter, I don't know if there's anybody you can necessarily count on when you need a bucket. And late in the game against Texas Tech, they needed a bucket. They went to Tyler Perry, and Perry couldn't get it done.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll never end up finding that. I think that as the season goes on and you go from game to game, certain guys will have to step up depending on the matchup itself. But I think really, man, I really think that the offense runs through these two guys. And even if for Perry, if he's not necessarily scoring at a high clip, but he's getting other guys involved, I'd love to see them kind of work some inside out a little bit. But I mean, I don't really know if there's a clear-cut remedy for what they have going on. I mean, they said it's a guard-centric team.
Well, and we know that Perry can do it. In that 20-0 run that the Wildcats had, Tyler Perry made 4 straight three-pointers in that run. So we know he can make the shots. But outside of that run, he was 1 of 10 from the field, 0 of 7 from 3. So he was feeling it in that time, and the momentum had definitely swung back to the Wildcats. But outside of that 20-0 run in the first half, Perry wasn't making his shots. Cam Carter, at least we know that he's relatively efficient from the field. He was 6 of 11. He had 15 points. That's the 10th straight game that he's reached double figures. So you kind of know what Carter is going to do. It's just concerning to me. And even though I like the Wildcats in this matchup, I like them to cover the 1.5 to bounce back after the game on Saturday. It does concern me long-term that really outside of Carter, they don't have anybody that you can really count on. I agree with you. They're a guard-centric team, but if you're going to be a guard-centric team, and I know Perry facilitates, you've got to have him be an effective weapon to score the basketball.
Absolutely. And that's going to come down to, like I say, finding those matchups. I don't believe Baylor is an elite defensive team, so I do think that they'll be able to find some of those small areas in the defense where I think they'll be able to exploit that. And a lot of that's going to come down to coaching and really situational stuff. So I think they'll be fine. I do think that K-State will pull this one out. But going forward, kind of like long term, I do think that they'll need to find a way to get other guys involved, maybe get some more pick and roll action, getting some guys cutting to the basket a little more, maybe just to open up the offense where maybe the guys aren't just staring at those two, waiting on something to happen.
It will definitely be a resume win if the Wildcats can get a victory. The Baylor Bears are number 9 in the country. And for a Kansas State team that, we're all pretty sure they're not going to win the Big 12, if you can get a big-time victory on your home court like that as you're building your resume for postseason basketball, this is definitely a game where, they can put that on their resume for the committee when that time comes. Baylor is 3-0 in the Big 12, a 5-point win over Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's not very good. They beat BYU at home by 9. And then, as I mentioned before, a 3-point home win against Cincinnati where they only scored 62 points. And of course, that was in Waco. So, now you've got the Baylor Bears traveling to Manhattan, and we'll see if Kansas State can get the job done tonight on that. Real quick, before we take a break, it's been, a wild start to the Big 12 season. We've seen the teams that everybody expects to be in the hunt all struggle at various times early on in conference play, including Kansas, including Houston, even including Oklahoma. Where do you stand right now on the way that things are shaking out here early on in conference play?
Yeah, I really think this is going to go down to not only the end of the season, but when we're talking about those conference tournaments. I mean, when you look at the standings, I mean, these games, like most of these teams are separated by 1 or 2 games, not even in conference, but in overall schedule. So I really think it's gonna come down to, one, the health of these teams, and then 2, experience. I'm still leaning towards KU. I think as they start to develop more of a rapport with each other, they'll figure out some of those issues. I think Hunter Dickinson, he's a former Michigan guy. He shows up in those bigger games towards the end of the season. I'm still leaning towards KU, but I think a lot of that will depend on their conference tournament.
Yeah, the new AP poll was released yesterday. The Jayhawks remain at number 3 in the country. It was a really weird weekend where you had a number of top 12 teams all lose in the week. Number 1, Purdue did. Number 2 did. Houston lost. I mean, there were a ton of top 12 teams that all fell at one point or another in the last week. So, man, that's college basketball. There's not a super team out there. There's a whole lot of parity, and I think we're going to see a whole lot more of it. The Wildcats, of course, in action tonight against Baylor. You can hear all the action right here on KFH pregame with Wyatt Thompson begins at 6 o'clock, and tip-off is at 7 from Bramlage. Wildcat fans, you can find K-State men's basketball broadcasts, all of them with the voice of the Wildcats, Wyatt Thompson, right here on KFH, and you can search for it on the Odyssey app. We'll take our final timeout, tell you what's on tap coming up on the other side. It's Sports Daily on KFH. All right, thanks, everybody. That's going to wrap things up for us today. A pretty normal day of programming coming up. Jim Rome follows us at 11, Bob and Jeff at 2, Zach Gelb at 4, and K-State basketball pregame begins at 6 o'clock versus Baylor right here on KFH. As you heard Ted, the sports had mentioned, KU also in action tonight at Oklahoma State. The late game will be televised on ESPN. Malcolm, thanks a lot, man. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here next week.
Appreciate it. Have some fun.
All right, for Jad Chambers, for Malcolm Carter, Jacob Albracht, I'm Tommy Castor. Have a great Tuesday. We'll see you back here tomorrow.